able to gather again right here on YouTube. Thank you for joining us here on This, That, and Theology Live. We are going to get started in just about a minute. And as we're getting started, here's a question for you. Are you planning on seeing Unsung Hero? I was able to catch that last night. I went to go see it with my mother and my sister. Fantastic film. I really enjoyed it. But leave a comment. Are you going to go see it? Do you have plans to it? Have you already seen it? I know when we saw it last night, it was a packed house. I was surprised to see how many people were actually there, and that was cool. Let me know. Let me know in the comments below, and then we're going to get started in just about a minute. All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. It is 10 o'clock here on Mountain Standard Time, and we are looking at beginning our series here, our time together here today. My mouse kind of fell off my table here, so I'm trying to put it back together because we are going to be looking at a website together today as part of what we're doing today, because the things not going the way they're supposed to do. So here we are today. Glad to have you here. Looks like I need to put a little bit more audio in here as the day has gone. It's like every week there's been something else going wrong with StreamYard, and so I'm planning on next week trying to shift away from StreamYard using a different program, because every week for the last 3 weeks there's been something that's gone wrong. So I appreciate all of y'all's patience, especially as now I have to reload everything that we had going. So there we go. We have our this is our topic for today. We are going to be talking about understanding media bias. So all of us are consuming media constantly. I hope that improved the sound a little bit. All of us are constantly having to deal with some sort of bias in the media and what we're looking at. And today, what we're going to be looking at, trying to sort out, is just exactly how you can tell what bias is existing there, and how you can kind of not necessarily adjust for it, but how you can possibly just be aware of it, be aware of what's happening and what is being communicated to you, and how you can just be more aware, because the more you're aware of what you're seeing, the better. As always, here on This, That, and Theology, we are going to talk about a little bit on how we're able to. Looks like my volume is still low. Hopefully, that's going to be a little bit better. Again, I have been having all sorts of trouble with StreamYard. Hopefully, that's a little bit better. It's been incredibly problematic. I've been surprised just at how bad StreamYard has been. It's one of those services that's supposed to be just really easy to use. It was recommended by Think Media, and I have just had a nightmare with getting it to actually work consistently. So let me know if that's any better. That may be the best I can do today. Hopefully not. Hopefully we're going to be able to continue doing things well, but it's been a little bit frustrating. So hopefully that's a little better. Hopefully you can hear me well. We're going to go ahead and keep going though, however, just to make sure. Yeah, okay. Like looking around camera and all those kind of things. So today, as you've been going through your Bible study this week, we have been continuing through our chronological, or at least a canonical reading through the Bible. Today, you should have already gotten into Judges, as we've in our Old Testament. We're continuing through Luke. You were Psalm 88 through 94, and Psalm 90. Psalm 90, Psalm 91. Those are some fantastic psalms. This is some great areas, and of course, Proverbs 13:12 through 14:2. Hopefully, you've been able to keep up. But as I've reminded us every week, if you're behind, it's not a big deal. There are 365 days. There's plenty of time to get caught up, and the most important thing is not that you're making sure you get every chapter that's read every day, because this should take you about 15, 20 minutes every day as you're reading through those. Um, if you're not able to do that, if it's at least that, or you should also be able to, yeah, just as long as you're in the Word and you're finding something that is beneficial, that there's something that you can reflect on. And that's part of why each week we're looking at your Bible reading throughout the week, and we're trying to say, okay, what can we garner? What's one thing that we can get throughout the week? Today I'm going to talk about Joshua 24, the end of Joshua, and moving into Judges, because this is the point as we're looking at our Old Testament reading where things start to get really interesting. We're out of the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible. We've been out for a little bit. We're now into some of the historical books that tell the story of Israel and their relationship with God. And I actually preached a sermon on this, the last sermon of last year on our church, and I will provide a link below to that sermon if you want to catch that whole idea. But as we're looking at Joshua, as we're looking at wrapping up this time, we've been reading throughout this whole week, the last couple of weeks, we've been seeing how Israel entering into the promised land, this land that they had to wait 40 years for entering because of their sin and rebellion, they finally get there, and with God's strength, they conquer the land. Now, they don't conquer it fully. There are points, there are pockets of people who they allow to stay, even though they really shouldn't have, and that causes problems for them in the long run. And that's really what you see as you move into Judges. As we've looked, we see that Israel has a problem with fully trusting God. We saw that in Exodus, when instead of trusting in the God who had given them the law, they try to create a false image, and they try to create a worship system that just is not consistent with what God has asked them to do, and they continue that all the way into Joshua. And here in Joshua 24, you see Joshua saying, "All right, we've conquered the land. We're about to move in. You need to choose today who you're going to serve. Are you going to serve the gods who are in this area? Are you going to serve and worship in a way that is inconsistent with what God has told you to do, or are you going to follow God? Are you going to worship God?" And they say, "No, we're going to worship God." And he says, "Yeah, I don't believe you." Because time and time again in the wilderness, throughout the conquest, we have seen that while God has proved himself faithful, the people of Israel have not. And Joshua knows, and he tells them, "You will be held accountable for the fact that you have said you're going to follow God and that you won't." And so as we move into Judges, we start seeing this cycle. Throughout the book of Judges, we see the cycle of them rejecting God. They adopt the pagan religious and worship practices of those around them. God brings a foreign nation to come oppress them and brings judgment. The people cry out. So God sends a righteous judge to deliver his people. He rules over for a period of time, and then they have a period of peace. And in that peace, they once again reject God and his practices and the things that he tells them to do, and they just begin that cycle all over again. And this happens over and over and over again. In fact, it happens throughout the Old Testament. This period of time when they just not able to follow God well. And so what we see in this passage is really, and as we're moving into Judges, and as we spend time in the coming weeks going through Judges, because we're reading through that story, you'll see some things that are absolutely reprehensible, and you go, "How in the world could these be God's people?" And yet God is still faithful to them. And ultimately, the one who is ultimately faithful, who is able to keep all the commands, is Jesus. And this is why it points to the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ right here at the end of Judges, right here at the beginning of Judges, rather, in the beginning of Joshua. What we're seeing is that while God's people can't be faithful and they can't consistently follow God, we know that eventually Jesus will be completely obedient. And in our place, He will take the consequence of our disobedience. And we need to remember that even as we're reading. In fact, in a couple of weeks, we're going to be talking about this on how you can study Scripture well so that you're reminded of the cross throughout these things. But as we're looking at the story of Israel, we know that it is a story that is pointing to God ultimately redeeming his people, redeeming you and I, so that we can follow him. So that is what your Bible study for this week. Hopefully, it was good. I hope you're able to get some time in every day. Hopefully, you were able to spend some time not just reading but meditating, seeing how that will affect you for the rest of your life. And so, um, I hope you continue to enjoy that time together. And let me know in the comments below. Let me know if is this helpful as you're going through your Bible reading each day, each week. Is this kind of check in to see? Something that we learn, is this beneficial for your week? Let me know in the comments below, and we'll see how we can even better improve it. This is episode 12 of This, That, and Theology Live, which is kind of impressive for me because I wasn't sure about whether or not I wanted to do this one a lot. But I'm glad that it's going well, and hard to believe this is now our 12th episode, and we're still committed to keep doing it each week. So this week our topic is about media bias, and of course that's something that maybe you may not think about. You will often hear about people talking about a conservative source or a liberal source or a progressive source. You may have different terminology depending on which side you are, because oftentimes we don't like what the other side is doing. But everything that we look at has some sort of bias to it. In fact, the whole purpose of this channel is to help us understand some of those biases because it's in everything. We talk about this as our worldview. It shows up in what we value, what we don't value, and in our media coverage. And I'm talking mainly about news today. When we're looking at how we get our news, the news sources we have their own kind of bias. Last week, we asked the question, where and how do you get your news? And some of you don't get your news in any way other than social media. In fact, that's one of the things that has been really surprising to me is how many people get the majority of their news now, not from a normal news source, but rather social media. So their news feed is actually coming from things that they're already agreeing with. There's something we often call confirmation bias. We tend to click on the things that interest us, and so the algorithms in our social media, whether that's Facebook or some other thing. I mean, I use YouTube quite a lot. We're streaming on YouTube now, so YouTube's recommended videos for me sometimes include news stories that they think I might be interested in. So we only kind of get the things that we want to. This scene is from the movie Newsies. If you've seen it, it's about the Newsies strike that happened. So the boys that were selling the newspapers went on strike. But we don't get our news that way anymore. Not really. Most of us aren't getting a newspaper that's a curated source that includes stories we may not be interested in. We're just getting the stories we're interested in. That's the benefit of the modern era we live in, is that we can kind of filter out the things we don't really want to pay attention to. But one of the things that we've lost is that we're only exposed to the things that we are already interested in, that we already like. And so you may not know about something that's happening on the other side of the world because it may not be interesting to you. There have been times, even in the last few months, when there's been a major story that's broken and I didn't hear about it because none of the news sources that I have on my feed are generally going. Well, many of us use things like 1440. Um, they're a newsletter you can subscribe to. They're what's called a news aggregate newsletter. They bring sources from all over the internet, kind of put them in one place, and then you can read them. And they say that all the news, none of the bias. And of course, that's not true. As we'll examine today, everybody has a bias. The trick is knowing what it is and knowing how you should respond to it. One of the things I've enjoyed getting is the pour over, and this definitely has a bias, and I know what the bias is going into it, but I appreciate the fact that not only are they bringing news stories that are good for us to know, but there's also a biblical. Again, we're a Christian channel, and they try to also connect this to how we should live our Christian walk. How do we respond to some of the news items that show up in the day-to-day stuff? Or maybe you are still getting things from a traditional source. Maybe you're looking at NBC News, NPR, CNN, Fox News. Some of these we know pretty clearly right away. There is a lean one way to the other. I know some of these. NBC News has never hid the fact that they're more progressive, as they would call it, and Fox News has built their entire brand on being conservative. In fact, if you look at the bias chart, what we're going to in a minute, they're very far on the right, and they know that that's their customer base. NPR for a long time tried to be considered as balanced, but especially in most recent days, we've seen articles coming out saying that no, they're really not. In fact, there was an article that just came out about 2 weeks ago, and Al Mohler picked up on it on the briefing, and it's made a buzz throughout the news world because one of the senior editors at NPR made a comment and said, "We've lost the trust. People don't trust us anymore. We are a publicly funded organization, and we're not functioning that way." One of my favorite shows on NPR. I used to work at an NPR radio station. It was a local station in Illinois. And one of the things I really appreciated was programs like the Diane Rehm Show, which isn't on the air anymore. I loved the fact that Diane Rehm would, at the end of the week on Friday at about 10 o'clock, she would do the Friday News Roundup. The first hour would all be domestic, the second hour would be international. And she'd have a conservative, she'd have a liberal, and she'd have someone who said that they were a moderate. And they looked at all the news throughout the week to give us a fair and balanced, or at least a more general understanding of how people may look at an issue. So, if a new pipeline was going in, what was the perspective from all of those different places? These days, we don't see that at all. In fact, you don't have that in NPR. And that was some of the points that he was making is that NPR as a news organization is so completely left leaning in their policies. It's even more left leaning than they were previously, that they've lost the trust of the people because they're no longer providing an opportunity for both sides to be understood. So it's helpful for us to continue this conversation by first talking about what we mean by bias. According to dictionary.com, and the Oxford language, bias is basically a prejudice against or for one thing, person, or group, usually in a way considered to be unfair. And it doesn't necessarily have to be an unfair bias, but it does mean that we understand that we're going to look at things with a certain amount of preconceived ideas. Here at the This, That, and Theology, we often talk about that as being a worldview. Well, we're going to look at the media, we're going to be looking at news stories, and we're going to be looking at those with a particular bent because that's the worldview we already have. Now, the misconception, especially by people who do a lot of these news programs, is they're like, "Oh, there's no bias." In fact, CNN for a long time they said that their motto was "No bias, no bull," and most of us didn't buy that. We understood that there was a large amount of bias that was coming through, and we would say it was one way or the other. But sometimes it's hard to understand, especially if it's not a news source that is mainstream, one of the big news sources, to kind of say, well, what kind of bias do they have? A few years ago, I discovered this chart, and this is from adfontsmedia.com. You can go on, they have an interactive page, and you can see where your news outlet, the programming that you're watching, where that fits on that huge uh, spectrum of things. And we're going to go through this as well. And recently, I've also discovered another website called AllSides. This is a great one because it'll actually give you all the reasons why they're uh, listing it as being center or right or left or somewhere in between there. And you can see those things listed right there on there. And again, we're gonna take a moment today and we're gonna look at how to use these tools because the reality is that the more you know, the more you know, the more you understand, the better you're able to handle what we're doing with all of those news sources. So I'm going to share my screen here. This is the first time we've done this, particularly in this way, and we're going to take a look at all of those things. We're going to start with that interactive table, the one that lets us kind of take a look at what we're we're doing now. So as you look on here, you see all of this big list of all the different news sources that you have, and this website, as opposed to the other one, the second one we'll look at. The other one does not look at broadcast media. This one does look at broadcast media. And you have this coordinate up here. If you look along the top there, that is the higher up you go on the graph, the more in depth they're reporting. And it's no surprise that the more in depth reporting, the more you're trying to get all the details of the facts, the more towards the center you'll go. Now, you'll notice this entire graph is leaning left. And so there is certainly that, and you can zoom in. So if we wanted to see, say what on this area, you can see these areas. These are all popular news sources. You may even be getting those in your email. That you might be getting them as articles that are showing up. They may just show up on your news feed. So if something comes up and it's from Daily Beast, you know, okay, Daily Beast is okay. They're kind of somewhere in the middle. As far as their in-depth reporting, but they're definitely pretty far to the left. You can do the same thing by looking on the right and looking to see what areas you have here. Most people are not going to be surprised when they see something like Fox News on that area, but there are oftentimes people will look for new news outlets, and they're surprised at where that bias list is. Now, so for most of us, this is not going to be new or surprising, but it is something that I think is interesting, and we need to spend some time looking at how all of these things go. Now, I would generally suggest that as you're looking for news sources, if you find that your news source on this particular graph, if you see that on the lower, the red area, or even in the area, the yellow area, the kind of orangish area, if you're seeing these things down in here, that's probably not a good source of news. Now, you may get great opinions coming out of those, but it's not going to be a source where you can get reliable news because they're going to be so, the more bias you have, the less you're going to be doing in depth reporting. So let's take a look at how they get those listings here on NPR. You're looking. I already did a couple of these searches in advance so that we could just quickly do them. But you see here NPR. These are all the news stories that they've used to kind of judge, and they've measured where that bias is. And there was a time when most of those would be, right down on the center line, but you see more and more are moving to the left, which is why that article that came out recently really reflected what people already knew. They have a group and some third-party groups that are going through and judging those things just to see where there are. It's pretty clear. You look at all of those news articles. So as a whole, if you're reading an article or listening to a radio program on NPR, it's going to be a little left-leaning. This is Fox News, and you can see, again, a lot of their stuff, they try to get on the center line there, but a lot of it is not. And you see the majority of their stories are right up here in this area, in that upper right-hand coordinate, which is where you want to see them, where they're doing in-depth, but they are going to be looking at it with a certain conservative bias. And of course, you do have some that'll dip a little lower into more opinion pieces. And as you're reading, very often we can figure out that those kinds of things are happening. This is NBC News. Again, same kind of a deal. Definitely more on the left. You see some of their articles, not a lot of them that are way down here, but the majority of the articles you're going to find on NBC News, they're going to have a left-leaning bias. One more, we have the Wall Street Journal. Now, the Wall Street Journal is definitely slightly conservative in how they present things, but they do really try to be right in the middle. Unfortunately, Wall Street Journal is pretty much only business. So while they do have some opinion articles and things like that, that's where you're going to see a lot of those lining. And so that's the ad fonts. That's the media bias interactive chart. That first tab you have here, and you can get there. There's an app for it. You can subscribe to it. This is just the basic. This is the free stuff, and it's really interesting. If you wanted to, look up any kind of article that you're looking, you can go to the website. You can type it in. You can just get a quick idea. But there's not a lot of detailed analysis that you can find. And that's where I find the second group, the media bias chart from allsides.com. That one is really handy. And on this website, you can do a search for any media source. They also have them all just kind of listed out here. And not only are they vetted by independent sources, but they're actually asking all of their users, hey, do you agree with our writing or not? So here you look at, for instance, Forbes magazine. They're saying Forbes is pretty centered. Do you agree? Is that center or not? You can click on it and it will kind of give you a rundown of why they say that's done. They tell you how it's been done. They show you what articles have been used over time. And so we'll use those same four. I mean, I pulled Forbes up just because I happened to see and it had a C on it. Because again, I tend to look for news articles that are C. But you look in the, for instance, NPR, they're definitely way over there in the leaning left. Some people would argue they're very left. But as you scroll down throughout the page, and not only will it give you the history of how that has been moving, which is very handy, it'll tell you when those things have happened. It'll say what the majority of people who have been responding have said, and they'll give specific articles on why they've been giving that argument. So, for instance, with NPR, some of the articles they talked about are issues with the LGBT community and the way those things are presenting and how they're talking about the conservative side, talking about them being ultra conservative. This also includes the issues of abortion. And this is current enough that even the article that came out 2 weeks ago shows up on their analysis of why it should be this way or not. And NPR, of course, has a lot more than many of the others do because it is one of those things that people pay attention. Because one of the things about NPR is it is publicly funded. Our tax dollars are going to it, so we would hope that it would be a little bit more balanced. But especially in the last few years, that is not the case. Fox News, they're showing why they're saying that it's gotten those. That's another one that goes there. It'll tell you who owns it. That's also important to know who owns the news that we're watching, because I would guarantee if you're looking at what Fox is producing as far as entertainment, you wouldn't say that they are right leaning, but they are definitely right leaning as far as how they present the news, and the same process. You see the history. You see how people have responded. You see the methodology. So if you're looking at a details guy. All of those things are there. There are particular articles that have shown up saying, yeah, these are issues. NBC News, another one. I find it interesting that according to AllSides, NBC News is less left leaning than NPR, which is part of the scandal that's shown up recently. And then, of course, also the Wall Street Journal again. And then again, they're trying to be pretty centered. So pretty centered as far as what they're doing with all of that. So why is this important, and what do you do with this information? Because one of the downsides of our culture right now is how much we have lots of data, but we don't know how to put that into context. We don't know how we're supposed to use that information. I like this graphic that's over there because when I was growing up watching cartoons, they would have this show up every now and again with something informational, something that was informative, so that we can kind of do more than just see it. It's important that we know what bias is in what we're watching, not necessarily so we discard everything. Because if you do, for instance, listen to NPR or get an article from NBC, or even see one of those articles like some of the magazines, like if you saw a Vanity Fair article or something like that, it's not a reason not to listen to it or read it, but it's good to know what perspective they're coming from. Many years ago, when I was working in a factory, I would often intentionally listen to very progressive radio stations, not necessarily because I would agree with them, because I wanted to understand their perspective. How did they get to the opinions that they had? It's good for us to understand where other people are coming from. It's also good to understand how other people may see a particular issue. I talked about the Diane Rehm show earlier. One of the reasons I loved that show was because it helped us understand how someone else might see the same issue. Now, I feel very, very strongly about the issues of abortion, but it's good for us to also understand how somebody who is rational, intelligent, is sometimes compassionate, how they would come to a different perspective. We can disagree with them, but it's good for us to understand how they got to that position. Because once you can understand how a person has gotten to a belief, that's when you can actually start to have dialogue, to actually enter within, to try to change their mind, to help them see your point of view and maybe bring them to the truth. In today's culture, with truth being so subjective, or at least our perception of truth is being so subjective, where many people don't believe there is an objective truth. It's good for us to know what perspectives is being presented and why. And so when you're looking at your news, when you're looking at that article that somebody sends you, when it shows up on your Facebook feed, not necessarily because you agree with it, but because it may be related to something that you have been thinking about, knowing that, yes, this article is either aligned with what I think, and so I'm generally going to hear something I agree with, or if it's going to be something I disagree with. And more importantly, maybe it's something that you wouldn't be interested in the first place. I encourage you, take a look at some of these media sources and look at articles that you may not be interested in at all. Because if we're only seeing the things we're interested in, the only things we already believe, then we're going to be less informed. We're going to be less understanding. Now, how does this connect to gospel living, and how does this intersect with our worldview? The most important thing about us isn't necessarily that we have conservative political views or liberal political views, it's that we hold to the gospel of Jesus Christ. That we believe that in this world, which is sinful and in active rebellion against God, Jesus died in our place, just as we talked about in our devotional. We will consistently fail to live up to God's expectation. And that's why the gospel is such good news, that Jesus came, lived a perfect life in accordance to everything that God had put out that we can't do. He lived a perfect life and then took our punishment in our place. And because of that, we can have a restored relationship with God and we can spend eternity with Him. That our eternal destination is not condemnation and punishment, but joy and glory and spending time with our Creator for eternity. That's great. That's the most important thing. And if we're so focused on making sure that we um, just tell that without being able to understand where another person is coming from, we'll never get through them. They'll just view that position as being opposed to their worldview. It's good for us to know not only where we're getting our information from, is this in line with our worldview, but also helping us understand how other people talk. Not just because it's good to know, because that's how we can share the gospel. And that's why the more you know, the better. And hopefully that's been helpful. I find this kind of stuff interesting and neat. And so I have spent more time than I probably should just browsing through these websites. But as you're looking at what's showing up on your news feeds, in your Facebook, as when somebody sends you an article going, hey, did you know about this? You can double check, see, okay, where is this coming from? Is this so that you can be better informed in how you interpret what they're saying? And hopefully that's been really helpful. Well, this week we also talk about the kind of things that I've been up to. I have been back in Flight Sim. I downloaded a cool little app that goes along with Flight Sim called NeoFly that lets you kind of do jobs. And so while I'm still doing my flight around the nation, now I'm doing it where I'll take a passenger to one place or another. Helps determine what airport I'm flying to. It's just kind of fun. It's just one extra thing to add into it. My understanding is the new version of Flight Sim is going to have that kind of thing already built into it, but that'll be cool. I've also been spending some time playing No Man's Sky with my son. It's a, if you're not familiar with it, it's a science fiction space game where you can go and you can mine resources, build ships, build bases, all of those things. And so that's been something we have enjoyed playing together because we have it on multiple devices, so we can sit in the same room and we're building bases and finding resources and mining and going and hunting bad guys and all those kind of things. It's a lot of fun. And so I've really been enjoying that and trying to get a little bit of time in Final Fantasy. As you know, if you've been following the channel at all, I was really looking forward to this game. Finding time in the last couple of weeks to have any moment to play it has been difficult, but I have been able to get some time into it, and that's I'm glad I have been doing that as well. I also, as I said, I saw the unsung hero movie last night, and expect a review for that coming out within the next week. I'll probably do some of the recording as soon as we're done here. Um, but a great film. I can't encourage you enough. Go see this film. It's fantastic. I know that for me, it was quite personal because many of the things that the Smallbones family went through is very similar to our own story, right down to moving down to Nashville without having the jobs that we were expecting. It was great. On the complete other side of the spectrum, I rewatched John Wick this week, and it is not a family friendly film in any way. It is rated R for a reason, and it's got lots of violence and some language. Not a whole lot of sensuality, which is kind of refreshing. But it showed up on my notifications that it was going to be leaving one of the streaming services, and so I said, "Oh, I should watch it again." It is a fantastic revenge film, to be sure, even if it's not appropriate for little ones. And that's kind of got me interested in pulling on my VR again and playing a game called. Um, uh, oh goodness, I'm forgetting the name. Uh, it's not bullet time. I'm so um, pistol whip. No, it's not pistol whip. Anyway, I can't remember the name of the app. That's going to bother, but it's a rhythm based shooter where you have kind of polygonic um, things and you shoot the bad guys in time. In fact, there's a whole level series that's based off of John Wick. So it's something I'm looking forward to getting back in. And as soon as I put my VR headset on, it'll show up and I'll know it. So hopefully this has been helpful. Understanding media bias, understanding where it's coming from, giving you tools so that you can do some exploration on your own. There's a lot of local news stuff that's even put on here. It used to be you got your news from two or three sources. There are so many media sources out there now. So many ways to get your news. Hopefully, this has been helpful to help you understand if it's something that you can trust. Are they actually going in deep, or is it mainly opinion? Is it a trustworthy source? And if it's a trustworthy source, where on that line are they going? Next week, I do have a plan for next week, and next week we're going to talk about when we're going to say no. When we're going to say no to particularly media. Of course, last year, Oppenheimer, one of the biggest films of the year, won all sorts of awards. I chose not to go see it because there were content in it that I just decided, you know what? As good of a film it is, I'm not going to see it in theaters, and I still haven't seen it. And if you are following video games at all, there was a video game that came out. Actually, the release date is today, and it's called Stellar Blade. And I did download the demo to play it, and I played it for maybe 20 minutes and realized, you know what? This is just not worth it. When the game designer tells you that the reason they added a certain amount of motion, we'll just say, to a character model is because you're going to be looking at that backside for a long time and may give you pause on whether or not something you really should be spending your time on. So we're going to talk about that next week, not just in films and video games, but in other things. When a good thing is something you're still going to say no to, that'll be again, that'll be next week. Thank you for watching This, That, and Theology live on this Friday. I hope this has been beneficial. If it has, make sure you've liked and subscribed to the channel. Leave a comment below letting us know how we're doing, and we'll see you next week right here on This, That, and Theology Live.